Okay, visual economic fans, I have a question for you. Do you believe that access to university should be free for everyone? Well, I dare say most of you probably think so, that there are plenty of reasons why free access to higher education is more than desirable. For example, by not having to pay university fees, everyone could be trained and get a quality job. In other words, university would be a way to promote equal opportunities regardless of the income level of the students' families, merit and effort over economic capacity. In short, making it possible for even the poorest person to attend university seems like a perfect way of reducing inequality and achieving a more equitable world. And you may be partly right. However, I am sorry to disappoint you, but things are not that easy. The particular issue is a bit more complicated than it may first seem to us at a first glance. But of course, you want some proof of what I'm talking about, so take a look at this. This line represents the percentage of college access for young Americans. As you can see, the higher the income of the parents, the greater the chances that their children will have access to higher education. Specifically, while 9 out of 10 children from better off families gain access to university, only 3 out of 10 children from poor families do so. In other words, if you are born into a wealthy family in the US, you have 3 times the chance of being a college graduate than if you are born into a low-income family. But so far, of course, this is nothing new. The United States is not exactly known for having free universities accessible to all, so it is logical that these lowest socioeconomic groups have fewer opportunities than the rest. Well, take a look at what happens when we draw a line on the same graph representing university access in France. Surprisingly, the French and American lines are almost identical. Students both rich and poor, American and French, access university in very similar proportions. And now, I'm sure many of you are wondering, are universities in France also private? And do lower income families have to face unaffordable university fees that cause this inequality? Is France and America so similar? This is where the most curious aspect of all comes in. France is the opposite of the USA. France is one of the countries with the most subsidized universities in the world. However, that does not translate into the poor being better able to pursue higher education. It's as if having an almost free university doesn't make any difference. So now the question is, why does this happen? Why, despite the overwhelming difference in fees, do social inequalities remain virtually intact? Why does making university so cheap seem to serve absolutely no purpose, at least if we're talking about facilitating access? Well, the truth is that the answer may surprise you even more. What would you think if I told you that free, or nearly free, college actually increases inequality further? What if I told you that offering college at zero cost may be a policy that exacerbates inequality and punishes the less affluent classes? Today on Visual Economic, we're going to explain this paradox. Listen up. Just a moment ago, we said that both France and the United States, the children of the wealthiest families are 3 times more likely to go to college than the children of the poorest families. All this, despite the fact that in the United States, the cost of university is much higher than in France. And if you look at this information alone, we could deduce a key factor. Perhaps the price to pay for college is not what is causing these class differences. But if the price of the enrollment fee is not the real cause of inequality, then how on earth can we explain such differences between the wealthiest and the least wealthy families? Well, the answer is in the children. In a study done in German schools, it was found that children from families with fewer resources were at a clear academic disadvantage compared to children from average families. For example, while only 2 out of 10 children from the poorest families were able to recognize letters at the start of kindergarten, more than 7 out of 10 children from middle-class families were able to do so. And it does not matter whether the underlying reasons were cultural or material. The most interesting aspect of this data is that it shows that economic prosperity is correlated with children's academic development. And we're not only talking about children of kindergarten age, where apparently income differences should not mean too much. But why does all this matter if we are talking about university inequality? Basically, for one reason. As a student from a low-income family accumulates poor school performance, he or she is more and more likely to fail academically and drop out of the educational system. In short, if the children of the least prosperous families are less likely to go to university, this has to do above all with what we could call early school failure and not with not being able to pay tuition fees. And just like that, whether the institutions are more or less costly, it is not very relevant for curbing the problem. But take note, because there is still more. A study done in France found that 9 out of 10 students received financial aid from their parents. So far, no surprises there. However, the important point is that while the poorest received almost $3,000 a year from their parents, the children of the wealthiest received up to €10,000 a year. And as you can imagine, for many young people who have to move to other cities to study, this makes a very significant difference. Because in many cases, the cost of going to college goes far beyond the tuition. We're talking about rent, transport, food, and everything necessary to attend college, mostly alcohol. Needless to say, this is an undertaking that, for many families with few resources, is too burdensome, regardless of whether or not tuition is free. And that is whether other options such as scholarships or equality financing arise, but we'll talk about that later. The fact is that at the beginning of this video, we did not say at any time that free tuition is useless. We said that it can also be detrimental to students from poorer families. The question then is, how can free tuition hurt those who have the least? Check this out.
The inverted Robin Hood.
Think about it for a moment. A free university system means that it is free for everyone, for the rich, the middle classes, and for the poor. However, free has a catch. After all, public spending is financed by taxes that we all pay. So the question is, if the wealthy students are 3 times more likely to go to college than the poor, and if the state pays for all tuition with everyone's taxes, the state will pay for all of the tuition. Isn't that tantamount to allocating taxes to pay mostly for tuition fees of students from wealthy families? Well, everything indicates that the answer here is yes. In France, the average university grant received by the poorest 30% of families is around €8,000 per year, while the average grant received by the wealthiest 10% of families is about €18,000 per year, more than twice as much. This is what is known as a regressive policy, or an inverted Robin Hood. That is, using taxes to help the richest and not the poorest. Something that is quite ironic considering that taxes are always sold as a method of helping the most disadvantaged. And pay attention, because it doesn't end there. Another factor that makes this reverse Robin Hood phenomenon even worse is that the rich receive higher university grants and therefore more opportunities to access better paying jobs, and inequality between classes grows over time. By disproportionately paying for university for the richest, we make them even richer in the future. This is what is known as dynamic inequality. And to give you an illustrative figure, in the United States, a college graduate can earn up to $2,000 per month more on average than someone with only a high school diploma. So do the math. Be that as it may, and having seen the potential problems of the free college model, we cannot leave here without providing solutions. So the question is, what on earth can we do to enable the most disadvantaged to go to college without making it free? Is there a realistic alternative to highly subsidized systems? Well, the truth is, yes. And for that, get ready, because we have to go to England.
Nothing is free.
Although many of you may find it hard to believe, until just 2 decades ago, university in England was completely free. For much of the 20th century, the British government took care of university costs so that English students did not have to pay a single pound out of pocket for their higher education. However, in 1998, things changed. The government, in its infinite wisdom, decided it no longer felt like spending all the money it was spending on English universities and made them start charging university tuition fees of up to £1,000 a year. That's around $1,200. Although it must be noted that the tuition fees were lower if the student came from a family with fewer resources. In this way, the government was able to save a few bucks, and the students had to bear a small part of the cost of their studies. Nothing too serious. In any case, this small change in 1998 was not so important because of its magnitude, because it was the prelude to the most interesting thing that we're going to tell you about in this video. A few years later, in 2006 and 2012, the British government, in its infinite wisdom, made 2 other changes to the British university system, both with the aim of further privatising educational funding. And these changes, my friends, these changes were very considerable. Thereafter, the government allowed universities to charge tuition fees of up to £9,000 per year, thereby saddling students with a very significant part of the cost of university, while the state cut its public spending on tuition by almost 2/3 compared to the 1990s. In addition, the government eliminated the possibility for lower income families to pay reduced tuition. So everyone ended up paying the same price regardless of their wealth. So the question is, what were the consequences of these changes? Was it a hecatomb for poor families? Well, after basically privatizing tuition fees, there was indeed a group of the population that was the most disadvantaged. Surprisingly, the disadvantaged group was not the poorest, but rather the wealthiest. That's right. After the 2006 reforms, students from families with greater purchasing power reduced their university participation by 1.6 percentage points. And guess what happened to the rest of the students? Well, yes, exactly the opposite. The English government, through the privatisation of tuition fees, managed to reduce university spending by 2/3 without harming the middle and lower classes. And come to think of it, by reducing the huge expenditure that was going to the universities, the government now has more resources to devote to strengthening the most basic levels of education and ensuring fewer disadvantaged young people leave the education system prematurely. With this reform, the reverse Robin Hood was reduced to ashes. Wealthy students now had to pay their college tuition. Although, on second thought, now the middle and lower classes also have to pay more tuition. How is it possible that this did not affect them? There must be something else, don't you think? Well, indeed, that something else is what is known as student loans. Along with the 2006 and 2012 reforms, the British government launched a public loan programme that was available to everyone. The government lent you money to study, and once you finished your degree, you had to pay it back. This may seem simple and a bit lazy, but wait a minute, because the good thing about these credits is that they have a condition that made them very special. If a student did not manage to find a good job after finishing college, he or she did not have to pay back a single penny to the state. And so, thanks to this system, access to university for disadvantaged people remained very straightforward and practically risk-free. If a student earned no more than £21,000 a year at the end of his or her studies, he or she did not have to pay anything back. That is precisely why the poor were not harmed by this reform. However, we mentioned a while ago that apart from tuition, there are other expenses that must be taken into account. For example, rent, food, and transport for students who are forced to move from one city to another in order to study. And of course, there's also alcohol. Did the English reform take these factors into account to help disadvantaged families? Yes. In addition to the line of student loans, the British government also approved scholarships of up to £3,700 per year for students with limited resources. This, by the way, was reflected in the fact that students from less affluent families were now able to attend universities further away from their homes than before. All in all, that doesn't sound too bad, does it? And in many occasions, the key is not to spend more, but above all, to spend more wisely. Be that as it may, visual economic fans, from this video we can draw at least 3 conclusions. 1. Free college tends to allocate mostly public money to people who don't need it, so it's a regressive policy. 2. The main reason why young people of limited means do not access university is early dropout, not so much the cost of university tuition. And 3. There are more efficient methods to guarantee university access to all without public waste, such as student loans or scholarships for students with few resources. But now that we have reached this point, it is time to hear from all of you. What would be your perfect college system? Do you still think free college is a good idea? And can you think of any other alternatives that we haven't discussed in this video? You can leave us your answer in the comments below. And of course, don't forget that here on Visual Economic, we release new videos every week. So subscribe to this channel and hit the little bell button down there so you don't miss any of our updates. If you like this video, like it so we know. All the best, and I'll see you next time.